Hello, welcome to you. Alan Robson with you. Welcome to The Ghost Story. I'm glad that you're with us. Now, this is normally where I would sit to do our Tuesday night chats, the blah, each and every week that we have done for years now. And something came up, which meant I had to travel off tomorrow, head out into the unknown. We've got an awful lot of important stuff that I can't avoid later this week. Hollywood McShane, our cameraman and producer, has flown off in another direction, which means we could just do another blah-like show. Well, no. We've decided that because it's so late outside, and it really is late till super late at the moment, that maybe we have another option. And that other option, I think, is actually quite exciting. We're going to take you to a load of places. We've also got a guest coming on a little bit later too. But we're going to take you to loads of places. Things that a lot of Geordies should know, especially mad keen Geordies. No disrespect, Mackhams and Smoggies and pit yackers and border folk. No worries. There's something here for everybody, but something that Geordies just absolutely really should know. So we've had a bit of time to put together a very, very special show where we're everywhere. You'll realize the amount of work we've put in once you get into this show. So thank you for coming along. Spread the word as always. But first of all, how many times have any of you driven through a posh suburb of Newcastle upon Tyne called Gosforth? A lot. If you had to describe Gosforth, what it looked like, most people would say Gosforth High Street. And that's probably it. Gosforth High Street, where a young Mark Knopfler was educated. So, is that all you know about it? Well, seek and thou shalt find. Check this out. Oh, let me try that again. Oh, it'll work. Here we go.
Fairly.
Ah.
You could live in a house like this, or rent, or your mum, or your nana, or your granny, and then all of a sudden, something amazing happens. This, in the middle of absolutely nowhere at all. It's a chapel here in North Gosforth. Hard to believe. Now, think about this. I was looking up a ghost story from the 1950s, where a night watchman who was working on a brand new housing estate in Gosforth, which always means you can make more spondaloonies, make more money building in Gosforth for the people that's got a little bit of money. Remember that in this particular place, even the police are ex-directory. They get their cauliflowers from Interflora, or probably more likely Catherine's on Gosforth High Street. But instead, when they were digging up to try and put these houses in place, 1950s, they suddenly came across this, an amazing and incredible temple. And every now and then you'll see something like this, which I'm fairly sure at one point was a crest, maybe a family crest. Our history can be found in the middle of our modern world, like this little mini miracle of a chapel built, many people believe it was built by the Normans around 1060, 1070 AD. It's been mentioned in historical records from about the late 1200s. Back then, the Northeast was fiercely loyal to the Stuarts. They worshipped here till 1690. Now, if the date 1690 should mean anything to you, look at this, the altar stone. Beautiful, amazing, and still in place. Hard to believe. Now, 1690. Do you know anything about 1690? And I know history's not everybody's bag. I dig that. However, In 1690, King William of Orange was in the middle of a revolution to try and take the throne from King William II. And they fought a massive battle in Ireland with an English army against William of Orange and the Orangemen. If ever you've seen parades in Northern Ireland or in Glasgow sometimes with people with fifes and stuff, it's the Orange Man's Parade. Now, weirdly, the man, even posh dogs bite you. The William of Orange story and all of these Protestants taking William of Orange to their heart, and this will show you kind of the hypocrisy of religion. William of Orange was born a Catholic, a Dutch Catholic, a Dutchman who would be King of England. Now, he didn't want to be a Catholic, but the only way that he could have took the throne was simply by saying he was Catholic and allowing his family to boost him to do whatever he liked. First chance he got, he told his retinue, Catholicism is just for fools. It's just a way that people take power over others. He got it way back then. So he said, I'm not going to be that. All of his crew instantly panicked and said, oh, hang on. But if you don't believe in God, you're scuttled. The public will rise up against you. Nobody will support you. So he says, okay, I'm a Protestant now. So then it was Protestants against Catholics, as it already was on the mainland of the UK. But here in the northeast, this whole area was heavily supportive of the Stuarts. And of course, when you're talking about doing battle, they're very, very keen to stick up for their religious beliefs. About 85 to 90% of the people that lived, especially this far out of Newcastle City, they were Catholics. Now, if you look over at one of the side stones, Tony, there is a sword and a rose decal. You can't make it out terribly well because I must admit it's a bit knackered. That's not that one, it's the next one up. This is what's left. You see the edge of the sword? It's a sword blade. It comes up and then there's the cross, the handle of the sword there and the handle, and there's some roses. Not much left of it, sadly, but amazing nonetheless. Well, because the northeast was so fiercely loyal, you'll notice that the building is not standing anymore. In 1690, and nobody knows for sure, but it was burnt to the ground, and the people who were working here and playing here and raising money here and holding services, they were killed. And nobody knows whether the Protestants killed the Catholics or the Catholics killed the Protestants, but they were all killed. The church was burnt down by one or other of the sides. That was the end of it. Because you've got to remember, when the Catholics and the Protestants can't find other faiths to kill, or people who don't believe to kill, they'll kill other Christians. The homes built here, the builders claimed that they saw grey figures on this site. Grey figures moving around late at night while the night watchman was in his cabin. The remains, obviously, they've seen the altar stone. There's a nave, 3 rooms in total. Also on this site, as you'll notice, especially if you come up here, Tony, some of the stone that they've just laid out comes from graves. You can see the ancient writings on it. And the graves came from the 1600s. You can see it's not like modern writing or anything like that, just over there. The graves were thought to be from the 1600s. Quite likely those that were killed or died here. During the excavations, they found on the same site beneath this one, and that's the cool thing about history, is you've got this, and they're digging down to try and build the houses, and they discover underneath this a Roman altar. So the Romans were here. Now we're going back to the 400s. So the Romans were here, then a chapel built probably by Anglo-Saxons and then taken over by the Normans in about 1060, 1070. And then this chapel cum church, we're on Chapel Close here in North Gosforth. And the interesting thing is, in the 1950s, 5 separate ghost stories, all from people that worked building all of these houses about this place. Now, it looks as benign can be. I always like to just get your hands on a little bit of history. Now, 5 reports. The night watchman interviewed on the BBC back in the 50s, can you believe it? And in 1971, 20 odd years later, this place was in a local newspaper called the Sunday Sun that I used to work for back in the day for a while, for about 10 years in fact. And why was it in the newspaper? The Haunted Chapel, it was called. Now, because it's surrounded by so many houses and so many people, even just with me walking around it, I've seen people at the windows and doing that. This is Gosforth, are you going to rob me? Well, no, I'm not. But there's a bit of that going on. I don't mind that. Should always be a bit careful about strange people, and there's fewer stranger than us. However, think about it. How cool would it be for people to have a ringside seat at a place that's regularly haunted, even if the only thing you did was look out at it for 5 minutes every night before you went to bed? I just wish that some of these people, just for an experiment, 1 month, every night, just come to the door, take a click, and at the end of the month, see whether there's anything here. Apparently on misty nights, if this area is foggy, you see stuff moving through the fog, kind of man-shaped stuff moving through the fog. It's amazing. Now, I love this kind of stuff, and I'm very pleased for something that's as grand a capture as this, that North Gosforth Chapel has a little image of what the chapel looks like, or looked like back in the day, and you can see how it looked exactly like that. You've got your big room, little room, but there's actually 3. It shows you where the altar stone is, right in the middle. It shows you a font where people would be christened, and 4 column pedestals, part of a font. And it tells you that the last minister recorded in 1604, by 1663, derelict, burnt to the ground in 1690. So they've also got this, and unfortunately there's bird poo all over it, so I can't read the whole thing out for you. But one of the graves here had William Headley and his wife Mary and 12 children buried here. And I love this, the epitaph: in Christian hope one rests here, obscure yet tender, shed a tear. He was a godly, zealous youth, never deserting from the bird plop. Anyway, ultimately he says, ending his life in godly sort, yielding to the world a good report. So I just love all this kind of stuff. The birds have, of course, absolutely no respect whatsoever. They will essentially crap on anything. But North Gosforth Chapel, it's one of those things, because I wrote a book once called Nightmare on Your Street. A lot of people who live in places have no idea literally what's on their doorstep. If you drive through Gosforth High Street and turn right, there's a chapel here. Cool or what?
So there you go. How about that? Amazing. Absolutely amazing. There is Gosforth Chapel. Who'd have thought? And I know they've got a tiny little one that's in the West End of Newcastle, where I used to live. And there's little chapels hidden here and hidden there around the corner. And if you didn't live on that estate, you'd not know that it was there. Simple as. And I just think that's very cool. Now, I want to move on to my next little thing once I get rid of that, because I've got more incoming. The next thing that I've got for you is about the Blaydon races. Now, how much do you think that you would know about the Blaydon races? That's the question. So the song goes, now, if you treat it as if it's history, songs aren't. Songs have a degree of exaggeration in them. Now, it happens to be the anthem, not just of Newcastle, although Newcastle have taken it to their heart, of course, because he was a Newcastle lad, Jody Ridley, the man who wrote it. It's a northeastern anthem. And I know there's very, very few Sunderland people that might say, I would sing it every week. I would doubt that that's the case. But you've got to remember, I think this is just one of the glorious pieces of music of our folklore. If you're a northerner at all, from Yorkshire right the way up to the tip of Scotland, this is a bit of a gem. And it's not treated well, I don't think. Yes, there's a plaque in Newcastle on the side of where Bambra's used to be, down the big market, for those of you that have staggered in that direction. And it should be a massive, highlighted, ta-da, but it isn't. So, the Blaydon races, I didn't know whether I should read them out, just so that it makes sense to anybody who doesn't know what the Blaydon races are. Jody Ridley, a classic old-fashioned music hall entertainer. He wrote a lot of songs like Cushy Butterfield and She Likes Her Beer and all that kind of stuff. And he ended up writing a song about something that really happened in 1862. We went to Blaydon races. It was on the 9th of June. And I know you'll know the first verse. Everybody does. Gets a bit trickier after that. 1862 on a summer's afternoon, I took the bus from Bambra's, and she was heavy laden. Away we went along Collingwood Street. That's on the road to Blaydon. Then it gets into the course. Oh, me lad, you should have seen us. Passing the folks along the road just as they were standing. All the lads and lasses there, all were smiling. Fiesses ganning along the Scotswood Road to see the Blaydon races. We flew past Armstrong's factory and up to the Robin Adair, just ganning down to the railway bridge. The bus wheel flew off there. The lasses lost their crinolines off, and the veils that hide their fiesses, and 2 black eyes and a broken nose in gan to Blaydon races. Chorus again. When we got the wheel put on, away we went again. But them that had their noses broke, they came back our hem. Some went to the dispensary, RVI, then St. James's Infirmary, and some to Dr. Gibbs's, and some to the infirmary to mend their broken ribses. Oh, me lads. Next one. We flew across the Chain Bridge, the original old Scotswood Bridge, reading a Blaydon tune. The bellman, he was calling them, they call him Jackie Broon. And we saw him talking to some chaps, and them he was persuading to go and see Jody Ridley's show in the Mechanics Hall in Blaydon. Oh, me lads, off you go. Don't worry, last verse. The rain had poured the day and made the ground quite muddy. Coffee Johnny had his white hat on, war yelled we stole the cuddy. There were spice stalls and monkey shows and old wives selling ciders, and a chap with a halfpenny roundabout shooting, no, me boys for riders. In other words, get on me roundabout. Now, it's hugely relevant that we should talk about fun fairs, rides, particularly as we know the Hoppins, it's already here, the Hoppins on the Town Moor, the largest travelling fair in Europe. Now, this next bit, I want to ask you, those of you that absolutely consider yourself bleeding black and white, proper Geordies, like. Now, I've always said that people who are proper Geordies, if you're a proper Cockney, because you live within the sound of Bow Bells, and that's apparently how you tell, how do you tell you're a Geordie? Now, to me, you should live in sight of the Tyne. So therefore, North Shields, South Shields, Jarrah, Wallsend, Baker, Gateshead, Newcastle, also Gateshead and Wickham, moving along the river right the way up to Whalams and Corbridge and Hexham, and that's all the Tyne. If you follow the Tyne, inside of the Tyne, if you live there, you're a Geordie. Now, technically, if you live in somewhere like Long Benton, you kind of see the river from there. So it gets a bit troublesome. So we just accept anybody who wants to call themselves a Geordie, and that's fine. And for those that have any doubt, it's all because the people of Newcastle fought for a king that the rest of the North absolutely hated. He was a Hanoverian king. Hanoverian, that's probably better. Hanoverian king. Knew that sounded wrong. Hanoverian king, King George. German George, they called him. Not the brightest tool in the box, but the people in Newcastle loved him, supported him, and ended up getting called Georgies. Yeah, you're not one of them Georgies, are you? And that, as time passed on, thanks to Geordie Ridley and the Geordie lamp from Pitts, put all that together, Geordies became the parlance. And I am proudly one of those, born in the West End, overlooking the River Tyne. Now, be a Geordie. If you want to be a Geordie, you can be a Geordie. You can be a Geordie anyway if you really want to. You just got to call yourself in. That's enough for me. But how much do you know about the anthem? Like, where were the Blaydon races? 95% of you screamed back at me and said, Blaydon? No, it wasn't Blaydon. So what was the truth? That's where we're going with this. So I'm going to shrink myself down to a little box, and I shall tell you more while you watch this. Now, this is Dunstan Staithes. We've been there before. Now, the area of Dunstan Staithes, all the way along the River Tyne, right the way up to, for those of you that know the area where Costco is along the banks of the Tyne, overlooking the river. Now, as you can see, there's an awful lot of silt there. Do you see the build-up on the ground? This whole area is where King's Meadow Island used to be. If you can imagine, in this huge stretch of water, a massive island. Now, what they ended up doing was dredging one channel and allowing the other side to be filled up, to become land, turned it into a lump of between Gateshead and Blaydon, that little centre strip that leads along roughly to where the metro centre is. And that all used to be part of King's Meadow Island. So this is overlooking the river from the Newcastle side, because we visited Dunstan Staithes before. But this is from the Newcastle side, just to give you an idea, because this is the side where they kept the channel open. So a lot of the events on that original Blaydon races took place over there. And as you can see, it's still silting up this side. And my dad once told me that he didn't use the word effluent ever, me dad. But he once said, and this is before they cleaned up the river, because it's far cleaner now than it ever was. We've even got otter and the occasional salmon swimming up the river and coughing. However, my dad used to say that it was so full of effluent that you could walk across it. And I absolutely believed it back then. It was a very choked up river, but some people called the island Dents Meadows. There was actually 2 islands in the River Tyne. How many Geordies knows this kind of stuff? Crazy. King's Meadow Island, which was the big one that held most of the events of the Blaydon races. And the other one was a smaller island that was called Little Annie. And it was an annual event that had happened for like 100 years, a big market event. It was resurrected back in 1860, and it ran till 1865, and then they discontinued it again and kicked it off in 1889 at Stella Hofs, near where the Stella Power Station eventually would be, which was just down the road, just opposite Benwell, in fact. The final meeting was during World War I in 1916. It was abandoned on the second day of the Blaydon races because of rioting. There were 3 fractured skulls, 17 injured policemen, 44 arrests, and it all happened when the even money favourite in the horse race, a horse called Anxious Moments won and then ended up getting disqualified. And it was said that the horse was a target of foul play. There was drugging, hobbling, and poisoning going on. People trying to fiddle the horse race. But the island, this is where the island was, where the Blaydon races took place. People say, well, surely it had to be land. Well, it was land. There's pubs on it. There were houses on it. In 1862, most of the public couldn't get to the Blaydon races because it was bucketing down and they were unable to ford across to the island. The water was too fast and too deep. 2 bus operators from near Bambras would bring people along, people on the train, and the plaque. But is the song true? There you go. Hard to imagine. There used to be a large island called the King's Meadows in the river. Cattle grazed on the island. The island was removed in the 1860s so that ships could use the river at lower tide. But 1862, Blaydon races were held on that island right there. Now, the story of the Blaydon races, I read it to you earlier. So what bits are true and what bits are not? Well, the missing cuddy, the missing horse, one of the favourite horses was not willing to wade over the water level until it dropped, so it was missing from the race. Scotswood Road was the bus route. Armstrong's factory, Elsick, Vickers is what Armstrong's factory. They made large guns and firearms at the time. And I can remember just as a little boy skateboarding down Clara Street Bank right the way down to Scotswood Road, and you'd hear this horn go off, and all of a sudden thousands of people poured out of Vickers, all the workmen heading home, all covered in muck and filth with their little flat caps on. Remember that vividly. And a bit further along, the Robin Adair mentioned in the song, a pub named after a surgeon that some people claim was responsible for hiring grave robbers, resurrectionists, a man called Robert Adair. It was a rough pub. It really was a rough pub. And there was 2 versions of it because it burnt down and they put a new one in its place. It's not there now. The original demolished, the new version built in 1965, and it's that version that I remember. Burnt down. The Paradise is mentioned in the song. That was the village just along from Vickers Armstrong's. Paradise, it didn't live up to its name, just put it that way. It was rough as a badger's. We mentioned Newcastle Dispensary before it opened in 1777. Any people coming to Newcastle were told not to bother. Don't go to Newcastle, avoid it. Healthcare at the time didn't exist. There were no doctors and no hospitals. It's always something to be conscious of. And it was said, Newcastle Toon, even back then it was a Toon, Newcastle Toon is bloody dangerous. So a little bit of the song open. Now, they mentioned the Chain Bridge. What was the Chain Bridge? That was the old concrete Scotswood Bridge, opened in 1831. And they called it the Chain Bridge because it was held, the top part above the concrete had chain links across it. And it was a toll bridge. You had to pay to get across it until 1907. And then it was eventually knocked down and replaced by the one that's there right now in 1967. So who were the characters? Let's get into that a bit too. Dr. Gibbs's was Dr. Charles Gibb. He was a very, very famous doctor in Newcastle, famous because he was fighting cholera. Now, we mentioned cholera in the last show and how 20 litres of vomit and poo came out of you every day when you have cholera, and it comes out looking like wallpaper paste, like rice water. Disgusting. And you end up, more than 50% of you, dying of it due to dehydration. So, I mean, serious stuff. So, who else was in it? They mentioned Jackie Broon, Blaydon's town crier. His bell, his ringy bell, is actually in the Discovery Museum. And I love this because people of the Northeast don't stand for wasters and jokers and chancers. And Jackie Broon, his best friend, and you know how sometimes you'll call your mate a bit of a prat or a bit of a worse than that. His best friend said, "Oh, Jackie was a great tune crier, but nee bugger but Geordies could understand a word he said." Brilliant. Coffee Johnny, blacksmith from Winlayton. His real name was John Oliver, always wore a white top hat. He was 6 feet 7 inches, and no matter what job he was asked to do, he'd keep people waiting while he had another cup of coffee, which is why he became known as Coffee Johnny. There are ghost stories of him in Gateshead and also in Wickham, Coffee Johnny. The song by Geordie Ridley, it was actually based on a racist song, a black-faced minstrel song called the Slaying Song. It was also copied. The exact same tune was half-inched in a song called On the Road to Brighton. Now, that song is actually in a very famous film, Johnny Depp's movie, The Lone Ranger. The organ tune being played at the very beginning, if you choose to see that film again, is the Blaydon Races. It was first sung at an award to Harry Clasper at Bambra's in June 1862, just before the races. An extra verse was added to it at Wickham Mechanics Club 4 days later. In 1962, I was at the 100th anniversary that wasn't held on the island. It was held literally in Blaydon, in the wrong place. And I thought that I've told a lot of people that I won myself a plastic stingray because I remember holding a plastic stingray. I have since been told I held it because when they called me up for second place, I picked up the top prize and I walked around with it for about 10 minutes. Then they wrestled it from my hands, gave me a pile of colouring books because I actually came second in the egg and spoon race. I always thought that I'd won that damn thing. Anyway, the train called the Blaydon Races was named at a ceremony with Alan Shearer. The modern race is good. It could be great. It should be bigger and better. The Blaydon race should be as big as the Hoppings every year, in my opinion. Should have rides. I've always thought that the Northeast should have a theme park called Geordieland. And I can think of hundreds of ways to gear games around shipbuilding and mining and all of that stuff, agriculture, all the stuff we do. I could see a blitzing theme park. Anyway, in the late 1800s, the Fighting 5th Foot Infantry at Fenham Barracks had a song as their anthem, the Blaydon Races. They used to be the Duke of Wellington's bodyguard. They were known as the Old and the Bold. They fought in the Boer War, the Zulu War, World Wars I and II, 67 battle honours, 5 Victoria Crosses, 16,000 dead. They paid a price for it. The famous painter William Irving painted the Blaydon Races. That is in the Shipley Art Gallery in Gateshead. And there's a couple of little Blaydon stories. The island eventually disappeared because it was too claggy. During the siege of Newcastle in 1644, the Scots took over the city, of course, but the Scots put sentries on King's Meadow Island and shot dead at least one man who tried to sail past. The pub on the island was called the Countess of Coventry, and there's a ghost story of Jackie Broon, the verger at St Cuthbert's Church, a plugger for Geordie Ridley, who was the town crier. He haunts Blaydon Burn, where he used to organise picnics for the poor bairns of the community, seen regularly years after he died. And he's popped up regularly, apparently, at Blaydon Burn ever since. So, a lot of secrets about a place that, to be honest, is just a place you'd pop in for 10 minutes. But there it is. How cool is that? You went to Blaydon races without ever visiting Blaydon. Who'd have thought? And they say we went on to Blaydon Toon. No, you didn't. You got halfway along. Technically, I mean, the Metro Centre, we always say, is in Gateshead. And this is between Dunstan Stairs and the Metro Centre. It's the bit overlooking towards Costco and Dunstan Stairs. That whole area, a massive river. Now, imagine, kind of like if you've ever been to Paris, the island in Notre Dame's got loads of bridges in all directions because they've put the effort in. We didn't. People used to have to wade across there. You know, no massive bridges. You waited till the water went down and you went across the ford. And there was a couple of fords, one from each side. So what they did was, there was channels going around that island and Little Annie. So they decided, we'll fill one side in and we'll widen the channel on the other side to make it become the continuation of the River Tyne. How many people had no clue about that? Now, got a bit of a special guest with me as well. And you saw him the week before last. The nickname was always BB, for he is indeed bushy beard. And hang on, let me put myself in a place where we can do, hopefully we can bring you side by side. Don't know whether we can. Let's try it. Yeah, there we go. Hello. There's Paul. Hello, Paul. How you doing?
Good evening, Alan. Good evening, everybody. And I'm pleased you got the screen right so I can fit my beard in.
Absolutely. It's all, even the raggy bits on the bottom. It's all there, Paul. So no worries.
All there.
Now you came with us on a grizzly trail, and we normally take people on a hunt rather than a trail. How did you feel? You enjoy it?
Absolutely fantastic. I mean, all the years I've been going to Hexham, well, all my life, and the things you don't know about the place. I mean, the thing is, when you're walking on the Grizzly Trail, you encourage it. Look up here, look up here. And for every few feet, there was something. There was something to see that you know, most of the time you're driving past in the car or on the motorbike, and you don't see it. Absolutely fantastic.
Now, you are someone, I mentioned at the time when we were going out that Paul is the Boffin Richard, who's been on many an adventure with me on radio a lot, and also Ghost Hunts, similar. You've done a fair bit of stuff with him, but what's the most vivid thing that you've ever seen, or what is it that let you know that there was actually something to it? Because you're not daft.
I think it goes a long way back. I think if I can, I'll tell you the first thing I saw, which I can actually corroborate decades later.
Okay.
Which actually happened. I was a young boy, and I was still at school, and I'd been to Timor swimming baths, and I was walking back home, and it was a lovely summer's day, and I thought, I'll cut back through Timor Cemetery.
Right.
And goes through the gates, walking back, and then I just happened to look left, and there's somebody standing by a grave. And you think, right, no problem. But the only trouble was the person standing by the grave didn't have a head. All right?
Right.
There he was, and he was stood in what looked to be Victorian garb. He had the wingtip collar shirt and, the morning suit and what have you.
Right.
Pair of gloves on, and sort of it stood like this, but didn't have a head. No blood, no nothing. It was just like the hollow of the shirt and no head. And you think, that's different. And, being of that age, you think, well, all right then. And it's daylight. And, you were always brought to believe that ghosts come out at night. You see, and this is I still remember it was a beautiful summer's day. And it made you kind of like less scared, but it made it kind of curious.
Right.
And you thought to yourself, right, okay. Now, fast forward, 30 odd year later, say, right? Now, my mother in a bowling club, some of her friends, all right, I got the job of going to pick them up one day, right?
Yeah.
And a lady that was there who I've never met. I've never met her in my life before. No clue who she was, right? They were talking about different things, and they just got onto this, you see? And I thought, this is interesting. And, my mother would always say, like, oh, you've done this, done that, done that. And I can't remember how it came about, but she says, Paul was walking through the graveyard, and she just stopped and she said, I've seen him as well. And she described exactly, bear in mind, I've never met this woman in my life, right? That's an honest truth.
Right.
And she detailed everything, the gloves, the wingtip shirt, how he was standing, and where it was, which grave, and had no head. And this, as far as I could tell, Alan, was a straight up and down lady, no nonsense. And she said straight away, yes, I've seen him as well.
Now, how old were you at the time then, Paul?
I would say roughly 12.
12. So you see, if you see something like that when you're 12, you'll spend the next 10 years doubting that that's what you actually saw. Because you think, well, I was 12, your imagination's kicking, could have been anything. I bet you tried to talk yourself out of it, I would guess. And I bet your mum did.
Yeah, I mean, my mum, she's straight up and down as well, all right? And if you told her something like that, she would, just not a cuff around the head and, off you go and just forget about it. She would kind of, all right, okay, and then, make her own mind up about it. But this lady, I mean, I believe she was like an ex-head mistress or something, just straight up and down. You wouldn't mess with her.
Yeah.
And she come out with it straight away, and she goes, yes, she says, I've seen him too. And I thought, whoa. And, to have that corroborated all those years later, and that sort of kind of sets you off on the trail of it.
Sure. Who was he? What did he do? All of that.
Yeah, and then you just, but you don't have like a conscious decision of saying, oh, I'm going to go ghost hunting and things like that. It follows you around. Things happen to you, and then you start to take notice. Like, I took notice of that. And, your words, if you open yourself up to it.
No, I get it. I had a lassie that worked for me, and we took her to a place that because your family come from Nent Head, if memory serves.
Yes.
And that way, the very first time I took a team of mine to Killip Lead Mine, I took one young lady with me called Ashley, who worked for me on the phones. And Ash, I sent her down. I don't know whether you've ever been in Killip, but you've got to wade through water down a pit shaft with your tin hat on. And so she was walking down there, and I was about 20 yards behind her, and I'd let her go first. So anything that she saw had to be real, nothing that, anybody could create. So you go down there on your own. I'm 20 yards behind her, which is a good distance away, being the dork that I am, hitting my head about every 3 paces. You can hear the knocking of the helmet. And then all of a sudden, I caught up to her, and she said, I thought you were in front of me. And I said, why? And she said, well, I've just seen somebody. And then she stopped. And I said, no, to tell me what. And she said, I've just seen somebody walk through the wall just up ahead. And she thought that there was a wall that was built out that you could walk behind. Right. But when you get to it, there was no wall there. She saw somebody walk. And then when you look at the wall, the concrete had a door there once. So
Once,
people
yes.
used to go down there. And the interesting thing about the whole ghost thing, about people that just have a kind of casual interest in it, because yes, it's a fascinating subject, and a load of people who've never seen always think that we need to give our heads a wobble. I understand that, because you've got to see something yourself before you get it. But she took it as a laugh to go and check this out. Oh, that'll just be a bit of fun. And the thing that I said to her beforehand was, you've got to remember that if you really do see something, you can't unsee it.
No.
You can't then not know what's there. And the weirdest thing, about 5-6 weeks after that show went out and other people heard it, and she got a few calls on it, she came in one night and she said that she'd been out the previous evening, and she said, I was driving along the road and I saw an old woman by the side of the road, and it was bucketing down with rain, and I pulled over to pick her up. And when I got out the car, there was nobody there. And there was only a field behind her with heavy bushes. There's no way she could have been anywhere other than by the side of the road. And once you see it, you look for more to see, don't you? I mean, that's obviously what you did. Just finally then, Paul, give me one more. You have occasionally had a look. You've had a search, you've had a hunt here and there. Have you ever come across anything really vivid that you would you'd bet your life on?
Well, I would. Everything I see, you do the 95%, and but I would say, right, here's one: Midford Castle. You're
it's up the hill from the church. Yep.
Yeah. So doing a ghost hunt in there. Now, the usual bits of activity down where the cellars are and the the stairs and stuff. All right.
Yeah.
But I didn't like the far back end of the castle. If you were standing at the front, like sort of with the road behind you.
Right.
All right. I just didn't like the far end of it, I just no, there's just something, but never mind. So darkness falls, and still had this sort of don't like the back end of it. Don't like the back end of it. Now, about half an hour later, everything on your body was on fire, sort of, waking up, and you're thinking, oh, what's going on here? Then you could feel the fear drive come into you. And then I could hear this noise. And I thought, what's going on here? But by this time I had my back turned to like facing the road down towards the church. And I turned around and I looked over my shoulder, and I'm not scared to admit that I ran down that hill.
What was it?
What was it? As far as I could tell, it was a great big hound. All right.
Black?
Like, don't know the colour, but it had nice glowing eyes. All right. And it must have been about, I don't know, sort of wolfhound size, Great Dane size, because of, what you could see at the time. And I was driven out of the castle, Alan, right? Now, and you think, hell, what am I running down this bank for? So, but I got down the bottom, but what validated for me, right, is when I got to the bottom of the bank, the very bottom, I turned around and had a look, and it was still there at the top, looking down. All right?
Well, that's
now, if it had been your imagination, you would have thought, it's gone. It could have been anything, but it was still there, and it was looking down, and it kind of just turned away. No, it wasn't a live dog, because it would have been down,
You'd have had you.
It would have had
no
you.
No disrespect, only to caught you, mate.
But that to me, because the fact when I got down to the bottom and I turned to like gather your senses.
Yeah, you were still there to show himself.
And we were like looking at each other, and I I thought to myself, this is just nuts. This is just not happening. But yeah, I think that's sort of one of them that it always stands out in my mind.
Stays with you. Paul,
yeah.
Thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it. We'll see you soon. Thanks for coming on. Love your Sopranos. What's your other pictures? I'm just nosy.
Well, that one there, this is, hang on. This one is, I don't know if you like them or not, but this is the Smiths.
Oh, we like the Smiths. Yeah, the Smiths.
Yeah, this is. We were actually here. Salford Lads. This is a Salford Lads club where they are.
All right.
And we were here a couple of weeks ago, standing outside the Salford Lads club because we went to see Morrissey in concert.
Oh, brilliant! Great.
And absolutely, he's still going strong. He's 65 years of age.
He's a good man. Good man. Hey, no bother. We must dive on. But Paul, thank you very much, and thanks for destroying your living room for me. Appreciate that as well.
Oh, anytime.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye-bye. There you go. Superhero Paul helping us out the other day. Didn't get much of a chance to talk to him because we had to get on with the Grizzly Trail that we were on. Now, moving on to our next Habnab. Our next Habnab is a place that we've been to ghost hunting before. Now, obviously, because I'm on my own tonight and I'm disappearing, as I mentioned, tomorrow, and Tony has already disappeared. Tony went out to take a closer look at a place that we were told we have to go back to. Now, just because Tony managed to film it doesn't mean we won't still go back. We probably still will. But let's find out a little bit more about Hollinside Manor. And here it is. Hollinside Manor. This is the little road that leads to it. There's the plaque, and Tony's having to go along through it. And Old Hollinside, it's in the Derwent Country Park, if you've actually been up in that direction. Don't know whether you can hear Tony's footsteps. Good night to actually get up there because it's a bit of a faff. And if you're going, make sure you wear wellies, and because it can get extremely claggy. You've got to be very, very careful. Old Hollinside is a fortified manor house. Now, there's various names for these kind of places. Basel is probably the most. It's not quite a castle. I think somebody once called me a bit of a Basel. It had to fortify itself to try and protect itself in the 1200s from ravagers, armies, reavers, chancers, thieves, highway folk. So they had it built rather more for, not for comfort, but actually for protection more than anything else, because they were preying on properties. Now, this whole area, keep your eyes peeled, because there is said to be a couple of ghost stories, especially members of the Harding family. Now, the Hardings owned it. They were all in excess of 6 feet tall. Now, to be that height, when the rest of the population, due to poor nutrition and a lack of good food, the average population was 5'6". You were a tall man if you were 5'6". If you're a woman above 5 foot, you are called tall. Now, in this meadow that's just off to the right-hand side that you can see there was said to be the ghost of a man riding a white mare. One of the Hardings, the ghost is said to gallop across that during twilight, but especially when it's thundering and lightning. You sometimes see him while the lightning flashes. You catch a glimpse of the ghost of one of the Hardings riding across that land. Now, the interesting thing is, as you know, we had the Vikings come to this part of the world too. And the Vikings, what they did was essentially take over the country. They ruled us for a amount of time. And of course, Jorvik became the capital city. And the Vikings, because they ate much, much better than English people did, the Romans were all like 6'2" and 6'3", massive big Scandinavians. And to see one of them kick down a door. Now, I don't know whether you've ever paid attention to some of the churches and to some of the old buildings. A lot of the doors to houses back in the day, they were about 5'8", 5'9" in height. And that was enough for most people to go in without knocking their heads. And then, of course, as nutrition and food got better and became more available to people, then all of a sudden they started to sprout a bit. But along this trail, the ghosts of the Hardings. The tallest Harding, as far as my records can tell, was 7'1". 7'1", trying to get in a door that was 5'6". And even on Hollinside Manor, and we're getting there very, very soon, that is a bit of an ask. Now, we've got Paul was just on there before. We've got his drone coming up very, very soon too. He got some drone footage of Twisel Castle. We'll be showing you that, where we caught that full-bodied image at the door. So the locals called Hollinside Manor the Giant's Castle, because if everybody's really short and the Hardings are, like 6'2", 3, 4, 5, up to 7'1", to all intents and purposes, that absolutely is a giant, no question at all. Now, when George Bose, you'll heard the Bose Museum, the Bose family, massively famous, and I mean massively famous, their family line linked to Queen Elizabeth II. I mean, we're talking serious aristocracy. George Bose bought Hollinside in 1732. Now, just to testify, because, it's very easy for anybody to say, oh, there were ghosts there, there was ghosts here, there was ghosts there. George Bose, who bought Hollinside Manor, testified to it himself. He wrote this: Hollinside is full of ghosts, huge, dark figures. There it is. Huge, dark figures that intimidate my family and guests alike. So these spirits in this house here, Hollinside Manor, intimidated and frightened his family to such a degree that they didn't spend a lot of time living there. They spent a fair bit of time there because they also used it as kind of like a hunting manor. But ghosts, huge dark figures that intimidated my family and my guests alike. Now, when we were there and we did visit the place, we did end up seeing all kinds of noises more than anything. We ended up having a conversation with a French girl in the lower cells. And everybody that watched heard this French girl singing songs to me, because one of the things they used to do at Hollinside was make money out of kidnapping people. They would kidnap them and put them down in the cells. You see the height of that door? For a 7'1" man, he'd have to fold himself in half. Mind you, the ground at the bottom was probably lower at the time. And there is a plaque somewhere that I think Tony's reaching for. It's a Hollinside Manor. What a place. And we've got these all over the country, not just all over the north. How amazing is it? During the border wars in the 1290s, the house was often attacked. Killings, assaults, rapes. And once it was fortified, they could fight back forcing some of the smaller groups of reavers and thieves to go elsewhere for their booty, both kinds of booty too. And in 1317, it belonged to Thomas Hollinside. That's how it got its name. He passed it on to William de Boynton and his wife Isolde. And there was a water mill called Clockenthens. Now it's had its name changed to Clockburn. Now, high up the inner wall, there's a window-like opening, and hopefully Tony's going to go back past the front. There's a window-like opening, tiny little window. It's quite high up. And there's the plaque. He's found the plaque. Good lad. There you go. Old Hollinside. Now, that tiny opening above the main door was used by defenders to pour boiling oil on those people that were trying to get in. Down in the basement where I had that conversation with the French girl was a dark and dingy dungeon for keeping in the people that they had kidnapped. One room on the first floor was used as a chapel where the bodies of the family were laid out and put on display before burial. On one of the outbuildings as well, there's the initials RH attached to the place, a coat of arms of the Hardings, and some Gulls, 3 greyhound, their family crest. Coming down, I think we're heading, looking out the side of the building. Lots of ghost stories. There are literally hundreds of regular sightings and captures, including us at Hollinside. Built more for defence than comfort, had its own peel tower, and to warn the locals if any harm was likely to come towards them, and a basel. And the manor also had to defend against border reavers. From 1455, by law, the tower had to have an iron basket to create a fire or smoke signal so that the locals could come and hide safely behind its walls. Animals would be stolen. Now, we had similar singing of a young girl when we went to Mitford Castle that Paul was talking about. See the tiny hole in the top? For boiling oil to pour down on people that break through your initial defences. Because the castle, or the manor house, was so small, they couldn't keep their animals in like peel towers are traditionally used for. They had hidden pens in the woods. And just along from here is Clockburn Lonnon. Now, Clockburn Lonnon, just up the Derwent Valley here, Oliver Cromwell led his army of 16,000 Roundheads past Hollinside on his way to the Battle of Dunbar in 1650. It was everybody thinks we've only had one civil war. There was actually 3. This was during the 3rd Civil War against the Scottish army. Now, the Scots had already crowned King Charles I's son, Charles II, as the Scottish king. And Cromwell wanted to put down the rebellion. And despite being completely outnumbered, Cromwell carried out a surprise attack. Oliver Cromwell, on a horse, led the charge that broke through the Scottish lines. The Scots lost 3,000 men, had 10,000 captured. The English lost about 700. And the Scots that were captured were the very first slaves sent to the plantations in the Caribbean, Jamaica, Barbados, Bermuda. Those very first slaves on plantation picking cotton were Scots. Some were slaves in the mainland of the United States. Others were turned into indentured servants, or they were actually executed themselves. So that is Hollinside. Pretty cool. Now, I completely forgot while Paul was on that he'd been kind enough to send me a drone of the place that we caught our full-bodied entity. This is all put together by him. It's only a couple of minutes, but if you've never been to Twisel, you've just heard us talking about it. he's made a real proper presentation. Very cool. Absolute respect, Paul. Thank you very much for sending this in. On hearing us up there, he went up with his drone out, and he's showing off his skills right here. Enjoy. Over the top, you can see how long the castle walls still are. They are surprising. That's probably him having a wander. You can see the circular towers on each side. Now, Twisel's right up on the Scottish border, so you can imagine just how harsh and hard it was. Now, directly behind the castle where he was walking used to be where the village of Twisel was. And we know that there have been sightings of some of the famous ladies that have lived in Twisel. Amazing. The whole thing is absolutely stunning. And it was around the front of the castle where we caught that full-bodied image. We were actually on our way leaving Twisel at the time. And look at that countryside. You know, people talk about, oh, isn't it beautiful abroad? Look at how we have stuff like this that you can just park your car in a 15, 20-minute walk and you're there. Good job, though, Paul. Well done. And we heard footsteps walking across that roof above our heads. And there's patently no way that anybody can get up there. Looks like Paul's missus put a picnic on. That's a result. And there's the bridge, Twisel Bridge, that we walked across with that love story just around the corner. And when you see it like this in daylight, and we got there kind of late in the afternoon, you just understand how utterly and thoroughly impressive the whole thing is. That something that's had so many battles still has two of its towers standing. And there's the river. Brilliant. Twisel Castle. And there's Paul showing off at the end. Good man. Well done, you. Now, we're going to take a look at a few other places too. A little bit further along, a bit later, we got some Viking tales to tell. And one that I'm inspired to tell because of what one of you guys said in our blah conversation not so very long ago. But I'm going to hand over to me talking about other stuff, and we'll do that right now. This is me out and about again. We have been to Gosforth Chapel, so it's time that we visit another bit of Gosforth. So let us take a look at that. That's not right. I beg your pardon. That is correct. I was right. There we go.
Well, we've just come off the Great North Road. This is Gosforth Racecourse with a tree that's snapped in half just over yonder. Almost like it's pointing us into the racecourse. We'll be popping in there in a second. But I want you to take a look at some of these amazing little tiny streets. Now, remember I've just mentioned the Great North Road. Usually when we come out on the Ghost of Story and to do stuff like this, there's a ton of history. Well, here there's only history of a radio show from back in the day that I used to host, and a story that came in about a woman who I ended up driving up to because she wasn't far from where we were working at the time. and I got an amazing story. The lady's name was Sandra Cunningham, and she rang me up live on air to tell a story. Some of you, if you're regular listeners, may well remember that story. And I'm just making sure the tour isn't back into the road, so I'm moving a little bit further on. I can't say precisely where she lived, but it wasn't very far from where I am now. Okay, not very far. Sandra Cunningham rang me, Sandra from Gosforth. And her story was that she was worried about a little girl. I'm not going to name the girl, I didn't on air at the time, don't intend to do it now, although she'll be a full-grown woman, probably with a family of her own. Sandra told me that her little girl had an imaginary friend and she was getting quite scared about it. Every single morning the little girl would come in and she'd say, "Ma'am, last night he was telling me about this and telling me about that." Now, where the history comes from, this old man was telling her about the Second World War. Now, this was in the middle 1980s. And he's saying, "Oh, when I was fighting in the war." And this old man told the young girl that he was in the Northumbrian Fusiliers. How does a little tiny tot find, let's say there was no imaginary friend, where does she get the Northumberland Fusiliers from? So the mother was getting a bit worried, and she rang in first of all to say every night she's got something else to say about old-fashioned recipes, the kind of food they used to eat in the 1940s and 50s. Where's she getting this from? And it was coming up to Christmas. And at the time I was saying, look, a lot of people, especially when they're littlies, they've got no boundaries, they haven't been educated, they haven't had any faith system put into them, they're a clean sheet of paper. Their imaginations are growing, and it's to be encouraged for them to have a good imagination. And that was enough to placate her, and off she went. However, it was about the second week of January, she rang back in. "Hello, Sandra from Gosforth," no longer a first-time caller, nor was she very nervous. "So, how are you?" Sandra told the story that she decided she was going to buy her little girl a present to try and see any of these stories about the old man visiting her every night, to get rid of that altogether. The little girl was very keen to get something that was mega trendy at the time. You probably had one if you're of a certain age, a cassette tape recorder that you carried around on a handle, and you thought yourself very, very cool. Well, they bought her a cassette recorder, and Christmas Day was a breeze. She never mentioned the old fella. Boxing Day, never mentioned the fella. However, on New Year's Day, when all of the family were around, the mum was very, very well aware that she could hear a little girl upstairs in her room singing nursery rhymes into a cassette recorder. And later in the day, the little girl came down, and mum was there, Sandra, her husband, her mum and dad, one of her sisters, and a few other close friends. And the little girl said, "Do you want to hear what I've done? Do you want to hear what I've done?" And of course, every adult says, "Of course, darling," when it's the very last thing in the world that you want to hear. So anyway, she presses the cassette recorder, and out comes the song. "Ba, ba, black sheep, have you any wool?" In the background, you can clearly hear a very, very deep voice of an old man singing along with the child. Totally freaked Sandra out, 100%. They no longer live in the house that they used to have, because within the next 6 months it was up for sale. They've told someone we're here. The thing about Gosforth is, it's burglar belt. It's best to be secure. But anyway, it's gone wherever it's gone, and we're happy for that. So she ended up selling the property that she was in, that she loved. She moved. The little girl never mentioned the old man again. However, before she moved, a lady called Catherine, who lived 2 doors along, came up and said, "We're so sorry that you're going. Why are you leaving?" And Sandra quickly explained the story to her. And this old woman said, "Oh, that sounds like old Tom. Tom used to have the house before she bought it. Tom died in the back bedroom just at the top of the stairs." The back bedroom at the top of the stairs was exactly where the little girl's bedroom had been. Now that's pretty cool. And we played the clip on the show, and you could clearly hear there was an old man in the background, a wheezy Baba Blanchard. Now, proof of a ghost? Make your own mind up. Hell of a story, though. Do you want to go straight on? So, just up the Great North Road, look at the fine gates, glorious gates. Gates of Newcastle Racecourse, Gosforth Park. Now, a lot of people would only ever come to a place like this maybe for the plate. I remember hosting some party in the park here back in the day with Lighthouse Family, Blue, and those kind of people. I brought a rock band with me called A that were amazing. They played so hard their fingers bled. Now, most people just know this for a racecourse, but one of the buildings close to it was an old anti-aircraft control centre, Melton Park, responsible for the anti-aircraft balloons. And across, during World War II, they put up all over the important parts of the city big balloons with metal hoses, metal cables, so the German planes would fly into them. It was Meldon House that decided where ACAC, where the guns were placed to defend Newcastle in the northeast. Remember that they were trying to bomb Vickers Armstrongs, where my mum was making bombs. They were trying to destroy that because it would have set the war effort back years. So they have this office in here with one of those tables in some of the bunkers, and it's just on the edge of where the racecourse is now, overlooks the racecourse. And what they used to do was they had the big table with a map where women in starched uniforms would place where German planes are and where British planes are. Come in, because there are a few stories that Gosforth Park itself is haunted. The racecourse. Gosforth, of course, called Gosforth because it was the Goose Ford back in the day. How beautiful is that? Decals. And the thing is, the places where people have seen spirit apparently here, some of it have been seen around the golf course. Some of it have been seen, and if you just look through the trees there, Tony, I don't know if you can, you'll see what used to be known as the Gosforth Park Hotel. And there's a bit of history here, because back in 1319, the English army retreated here to the site where the Gosforth Park Racecourse is. They retreated here following the siege of Berwick-upon-Tweed, somewhere we'll be visiting very soon again. There were bombings on High Bridge in Newcastle, 50 killed, 71 seriously hurt. The goods yard was hit, leaving 1,000 people homeless. September 41, a bombing of the Quayside warehouse. Now this is an amazing story, and it links directly with this place, because this was the furthest place that a unique something happened that nobody ever talks about, that I guarantee 99.9% of you have never heard of. During the Second World War, 1941, a whole load of warehouses on Newcastle quayside blown to pieces, including 2 warehouses that were full of honeys and barrels of fat that, of course, went up alarmingly quickly. They also had a whole range of sticky goods like treacle and molasses, hundreds of barrels of it, mixed with food of all descriptions. Imagine a massive food warehouse. Now, because all of that claggy went everywhere, there was a massive, over the next 2 months, there was a massive breeding of flies, millions and millions of flies, to such a degree that the people that lived in Newcastle, as far south as Birtley, as far west as Wallsend in Jarrow, as far west as Wylam, and up here to Gosforth, where it was said, even here, that is now the racecourse, where Meldon House was. If ever you were outside, you couldn't drink a cup of tea unless it was covered. You had to drink your tea with a straw because there were so many flies jumping onto any food that they came across. Millions upon millions upon millions of flies. Now, I'm sorry, why isn't that in a film somewhere? Why hasn't any television show ever shown that? You'd want to know. Now also, down here, and I know a lot of people live here, and there's I believe there's a, is it called the Brandling? There's a pub down there, just at the very bottom. This is a hit and run, so we're not going to move too far. But the reason that we're in this little bit here, this mini woodland, and then another story off the radio really, some people rang in saying, we've just been down to the golf club and there's a huge black cat, like a panther, roaming around just in the grass, in amongst the trees behind us. It's been in there about 25 minutes. And some of the people came out and apparently chased it. And they said it's bigger than a cat. And other people on the racecourse rang in saying, we've seen it. We've seen it leaping over things down next to where the racecourse is. Now, strangely enough, on one of the television programs featuring races from Gosforth Park, there was an image, and in the very top corner of your television screens, there was something that looked like a huge black cat. Now, we've all heard the stories of things like the Surrey Puma, but we could have had our own. Now, we know that this became kind of a talking point for a while back in the day, and it was many years ago now. But 3 years after the Gosforth Park sightings, a motorist drove to the radio station because he was driving past Washington Services and he had to do an emergency stop that made him spin off the road. And it was because he saw a large cat that was black running across the road. And he drove to the station and he was still shaking. He called the police, he reported it. It made the local newspapers, like many of the things did that happened on the radio at the time. So, talking about World War II, let me just read you one little thing. This, here it is. Now, Matthew Bank in Gosforth isn't very far from here. There was an air raid, 55 German bombers dropping massive explosive, 10 high explosive bombs, 7 dead, a boy called Newton Shipley, one of the untold heroes of Gosforth. Newton Shipley was a Boy Scout. One of the houses in Gosforth blown apart. They found him literally hanging upside down from the first floor by his foot. They couldn't get him out of the building safely. He was about to die because all the blood obviously had gone to his head, and he'd been hanging there for about an hour by the time they found him. Without anaesthetic, they had to cut off his foot to save his life. Did he get a medal? Well, he was just a victim, so not really. but he was a Boy Scout. So he won one of the very few Boy Scouts VCs, a Victoria Cross for Boy Scouts. And while he was in hospital with only 1 foot, the newspaper went to see him and said, "You've been a very brave boy, Newton." And Newton's reply should make everybody in Gosforth feel proud. He said, "Yes, I am very brave because I am a wolf cub." So absolute respect. But on another mission of the Germans coming over, and listen to this, this is stunning. In 1941, Spitfires and Hurricanes over the northeast brought down 75 German planes, 75 without a single loss. And everybody went, "Aren't the Hurricanes amazing? Aren't the Spitfires fantastic?" And of course they were the bravest of the brave. However, the Wazik alarm. Anyway, and yes, of course, those aircraft were fantastic. But they wouldn't have been able to knock out all of those planes if it hadn't been for intelligence, for people that nobody's heard of, who had a building overlooking Gosforth Racecourse, and they were hiding in a bunker, gathering all of the information to be able to tell the Spitfires and the Hurricanes where to go and how to protect the northeast. Every corner you turn, no matter where you are, especially in this country, there's a story. And they're just stories we should know, I think.
So there we have it. Hope you enjoyed that. A little wander around Gosforth Park. Weird though, because that exact area where we were, next to the little club that's just on the right-hand side, directly behind, since we filmed that, I happened to be talking to somebody who used to work at Gosforth Park, and he said that big cat, about 40 people saw during a reception that they were having at that club. And that little area of ground, because somebody had told him, because he belongs to that club, somebody told him that I'd be there doing some filming. And he said, directly behind that little club, just literally around the corner from the main road leading in, is where they were having this reception. And this huge cat, a black cat that was the size of a Great Dane, which is not like a domestic, it's not a feral cat of any kind, it's something bigger. They all saw it, and they all kind of went, "What the flip is that?" I can hear them say it now. "What the flip is that?" And they all came to the window, and they'd had a few drinks, and they banged on the window, and it ran off into the tree line. And they say they know that it's not a domestic cat because of the size of its head and mouth. Now, being sensible about stuff like this, you would think if it really had have been a panther or a cougar or a jaguar or any of the other big cats, obviously it wasn't one of the spotty ones, it would have to leave some evidence behind, wouldn't it? And that evidence would be dead dogs, dead cats, rabbits, badgers, foxes, sheep, lambs, calves, cows, goats, horse. Or would they just eat everything and then just leave a few bones lying around? And how could it live in a place that is so central? But again, to go back to the guy that drove to the radio station, who was absolutely terrified. His situation skidding into a ditch, because now we're told by police, and I know a lot of you are cat lovers and dog lovers, and absolute respect, and I know how lovely and cuddly and how much pleasure they give you. I get it. We're told by the police, it says in your driving test advisory pack, you know, that booklet that you get, it says that if there's a dog or a cat in front of you, you must not swerve to avoid it, because you will more likely come off the road and you could end up killing yourself. I understand and accept that. You cannot help but swerve a bit, because I've had to do that myself. However, he said the reason that he swerved was because it wasn't like a little cat. If he'd have hit that, he could have been a goner, because the cat was huge. He said that it seemed to be wider, longer than the width of his car. Now think of that next to a cat. That's a different thing altogether. So to be quite honest, I can't be too surprised that he pulled an emergency stop and skidded onto the grass at the side of the road. Luckily, he didn't go into a ditch, and he could get back on the road and get on his way. But terrifying, especially late at night. And one of the last things you'd ever expect, because that was on the A1, going past Washington Services, you know, where there's about 3 or 4 lanes either side of the road, isn't there? So there's Gosforth Park, and a great ghost story that I remember fondly. Somewhere in storage, I have the recording of that old fella singing "Bar Bar Black Sheep" with the band as well. And it's the stuff that when you first start to hear it, you hear the band singing and you think, oh, that's canny. She's really enjoying her cassette. Did you have a cassette tape recorder? They were massive at the time, with that little carry handle, skip along to, with a microphone that was about this size that you could sing into. And it also had the little earpiece so that people could listen to late night talk shows and giggle underneath their brand new Continental duvets that had just been invented. Happy days. The great listener of the late night show had moved from transistor radios and little tiny things that you had to pull the aerial up, to cassette tape recorders that had a radio built in, to all the fancy gadgetry that we have today. But amazing, grisly, ghostly kind of tales. Now, we have one more for you that covers a few things, and it's, I don't know whether you can remember, on the Blah, a few people sent messages in saying, I really like that, I loved that, one of my favorite bits that you've done. And this guy said, one of my favorite bits was the time you went to Roland's Gill and you told the story of the Viking. Meadow was his name. And he was a Viking, a Norseman, who settled in Roland's Gill. Now, we have that along with an awful lot of other things. But first of all, I'm going to have a quick Gansey just to see if there's any major things coming in. Sheena says, I remember the smells of the hoppings, hot dogs and onions, candy floss, toffee apples, not happy memories of me being sick after being on the waltzer. Well, one of my earliest memories, Sheena, was when they have a spinning roundabout called it used to be called the Rocket. I think it was the Rocket. And it was like 2 dustbins attached by a lever, and it just spun round. And all the kids used to hang around underneath, because while it was spinning around, all the change fell out of everybody's pocket, and it rained money. And if you stayed underneath there for about 40, 50 minutes, it could pay for all your rides on the hoppings. That was pretty good. My other over-abiding memory, I did a live show for the end of the hoppings, on the last hoppings night. And we had a crowd of about 3,000 people going crazy. And they booked me the following year. Excuse me. They booked me the following year to do another similar show, and it bucketed. Worst rain ever. And surrounding my stage, there was a puddle that was 3 foot deep. And I had thousands of pounds worth of giveaways. It bucketed the whole time. I went out and did the show. Anyway, my dancers and I got absolutely soaked, and the crowd danced in that puddle for 2.5 hours. And it was amazing. One of the best gigs I ever did. And we were the only thing that had a crowd. Everybody else had beetled out. The hoppings was empty except for around the stage that we were on. Loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it. Right, there you go. Val. I was born at my nana's house, Water Street, just up from the Tyne. Now I can see 5 bridges over the Tyne from Newcastle. There you go. And last time I was there, says Steve, the most expensive thing on the moor was £2.50. I'm guessing it's nearer £6 now. I've seen the prices, £3.50 to £7. So good luck with that. I love the fact that the old Red Cross building at Hexham was definitely haunted. I don't know if it's even still there, but you'd hear stuff and leave quickly when you were the last one locking up. And also, Steve's mentioned that Mott the Hooples, Mick Ralph's bad companies. Mick Ralph's too died aged 81. There you go. Champion. So thank you very much for your comments. Let me get back to our last little trail. So let me just bring that up. It is our trip for you, pour vous, to a place that many of you will know, for it is called Roland's Gill. And here we go. Now, another trail on that Derwent walk, not far from Gibbside. Now, this is the area where monks were hacked to death by King Henry VIII's men during the dissolution of the monasteries. Now, I think most of us, when we were at school, learned about the Tudors, and not when it was crisp adverts. You cannot beat a canny bag of Tudor. For those of you that can remember the old Geordie advert. King Henry VIII wanted to get a divorce from his first wife, and the Pope wouldn't let him have one, so he left Catholicism and set up his own church called the Church of England, and he made it up, and it's still going strong to this day. So he sent men around churches that refused to close, and one of them was Gibbside, and some of the monks were hacked to death. We got a really amazing story about Gibbside as well. We decided for one Halloween we were going to do a show live from Gibbside. We got our permissions. I was on radio at the time, and we set up cabling. We had to have our own generator at the time. We set that up just outside the main gates with a heavy cable over the road, and we needed to protect the cable so that if any vehicles had to drive over the cable, it would be safe. We got those special plastic covers that are 3 inches deep, so you had to slow down, slowly drive over them. Perfect. Throughout the day, we kept doing live checks with the studio to make sure that we were linked and ready to start the show. The cable lined with rubber. A few vehicles had to drive over it, a few small cars. We tried to do the show. 2 minutes before the show started, suddenly we couldn't do anything. Everything went black. We checked it 3 times across the day. Everything was working perfectly. I ended up having to get into my car and drive back from Gibbside to the radio station that luckily at the time was at Swalwell, on the Swalwellian Riviera. And the very next day, Paul's brother, our boffin, Richard, had to strip the cable. And he discovered, now this is the cable that was in 3 inches of rubber. He stripped back about 30 foot of this cable, and he found an area of 3 feet where the cable had been cut as if by a scalpel every 6 inches for 3 foot. 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6. And there is absolutely no explanation of how or why that happened. Now, the story of this particular area is the one about a Viking who fell out with his warlord, who's quite a famous Viking called Haga. And this Viking decided that when he landed his next longboat, he would just disappear into the wilderness and stay and settle here in this very area that's on screen now. His name was Meadow. The legend goes, because it is a legend, that he could throw an axe almost 200 feet with alarming accuracy. He used to hunt stag and boar with an axe, not a bow and arrow. And then one day, a Viking longboat arrived in Swalwell. Bedow's son just happened to see the boat land. He disappeared back into the wilderness and ran before there was a proper corridor here, just a trail. He raced back home, totally unknown to him. The Vikings followed the young man back to a small house. Now, I will continue that story in a second because I have to mention the Winlayton Mill Ironworks. One of the earliest factories in Europe was called Crowley's. It wasn't just in this particular area, it was spread out all over that particular, the area that is now the Derwent Walk. 1,000 people worked here. And the thing that is coolest about this place, Crowley's factory, Crowley's Ironworks, had its own laws, didn't obey the law, obeyed Crowley's law. Crowley's had its own health service, had its own schools, gave pensions for widows for any men who died there. Died due to lead poisoning, heat, disease, old-fashioned ironworks, toxic as hell. And all of those things happened 200 years before any people had those things. Crowley Dam controlled the water. The artist Turner painted a picture of it when it was at its height and busy. And this is said to be haunted. Sue Hinton handed me a piece of paper once while I was hosting the Great North Run. She's from Hentonley Hall. And she said, Alan, I was on the trail on the Derwent Walk around Roland's Gill. I was jogging past a dilapidated building. Has to be this one. I stopped to check my time and I took a swig of water and I heard a man scream, a terrifying scream, as if he was really in pain. It was 9:30 in the morning on a Sunday. A dog walker heard it too. We were both spooked and shocked. And just as we calmed ourselves down and got ready to leave, we both saw around 8 men carrying something. We don't know whether my memory fails me, but I thought it looked like a stretcher. The thing was, those 8 figures were walking through bushes and through trees and through the end wall where there's black railings at the moment. So that has to be here. There's black railings there. So just an incredible story based around a building that they're trying to keep people out of at the present moment. So Haga and his men chasing Bedow's son back to Breda, Bedow's wife, where they kill his children, including a young baby in the cot, and they decide to tie Breda, the wife, to the tree. Now, Beadow and local hunters heard a horn, apparently, that people used to blow if ever there were robbers, reavers, ravagers, or Vikings anywhere about. So Beadow and the hunters all started running home. Yet something led Beadow to think, well, maybe they've already been to my house and maybe they've taken my wife and taken my children, because a lot of the Vikings brought women and children back to Scandinavia with them to work as slaves or servants or to raise children as their own. So he ran to the longship. There were 3 Vikings just drinking, sitting, waiting for the rest of the Vikings to come back. He went down and used his axe to finish the 3 of them off and rescued dozens of young girls that they'd enslaved from other towns and settlements along the River Tyne. He got hold of one Viking and did him a fair bit of damage and then said, look, I'm going to let you live so that you go back to your leader and tell him never to return here. And that Viking spat in his face. So this character, Meadow, who was a brick toilet of a man, broke his back, snapped his back, left him alive and just bundled him onto the boat. Then he raced home knowing that his wife wasn't there, his children weren't there. He knew the tricks of the Vikings, being a Viking himself. And when he saw that red stain near his small home built out of the woodland, he knew that some, if not all of his family, were dead. He was raging, and with an axe in one hand and a sword in the other, he raced into his former warriors, his former comrades. They shouted out, "Kill her," about his wife, and Meadow sent them all to hell. The huntsman came and helped him, hunting them all down. And to this day, the story of this valley in Roland's Gill was that Meadow's heroism saved the valley, and the Vikings never, ever returned. Now, I'm going to just quickly nip back, not to there, to about there, because it was along this track that people say that they've seen a huge dark figure moving across the path from one side to the other. People have taken photographs of it. They've caught it on video. It's just a dark swathe, a dark moving shadow. Some people have caught photo images of this black shadow, but the legs are very, very clear indeed along this very track. Now, in my earliest days of believing, when I had to come onto the radio and tell everybody that I'd seen a ghost, after years of telling people that they were either daft or drunk or drugged for seeing spirit. And I sent the man who trained me to be an exorcist, an ex-Catholic father called Father Flanagan, who popped up on various shows, going to the homes of people that had poltergeist activity, and he calmed it down on a number of occasions. He regularly appeared on the show for about late 70s to halfway through the 1980s. And when Father Flanagan came down to this area where Meadow used to live, he said that he'd heard strange voices. Now, I didn't tell him the story of Meadow. I just said, this track said to be haunted, see what you get. So he didn't have any clue about Vikings. But when he came back, he said it was the weirdest thing. He said he'd sat down, and it was actually, there's like a little patch you can see on the right-hand side where you can walk through the trees. You see it just there. He said that he sat down there. Now, it was late in the evening. It was about 10 o'clock. He sat down on that patch just there, which is apparently quite close to, not too far away from where Meadow's home had been. And he said he kept hearing voices, and he kept looking along the track, but it was very, very dark. And if anybody had been there, they would have needed torches that he would have seen. And he said the weird thing was that the voices that he heard were not speaking English. And I said, well, what were they speaking? Was it French? Was it Italian, like as if they were Romans? That's the area. Beg your pardon. You know, I said it was earlier. No, that's it. The little track that leads up with the City Down place. That's where he was. That is where he was, just there. And he said that he heard people speaking a different language. And I said, well, what language was it? And he says, I've got no idea. It might have been Dutch or Scandinavian. Now, if it was Scandinavian, that's pretty cool. Now, I want you to take a look at that monument there. It's the Liberty Monument. It was built in the 1750s. And on a massive, as you can see, a Roman Doric column. For a while, it was the second biggest monument in all of England. And the biggest one, if you were wondering, is in London. It's a commemoration of the Great Fire of London. And it's got on the top of it the figure of Lady Liberty. And this was all put together by another one of those Bowes family, George Bowes. And it was put together to represent his politics. Now, he was a member of the Whigs. Now, you might have heard the phrase Whigs and Tories. And a lot of people think Tories, Conservatives, Whigs must have been Labour. No, the Whigs were probably what we would now call Liberal Democrats. And that was his party. And his party at the time hated Catholics, supported German George, Mad King George, the George from the Georgies, for the Geordies. And because of George Bowes and the Bowes family, one of the great untold, or regularly untold stories. I don't know whether you've ever been into Gibbside. You know, had a proper official tour of Gibbside. But Gibbside is haunted by the unhappy Countess. Now, the unhappy Countess, a lady who also owned Glamis Castle, you know, the one associated with Queen Elizabeth II, and especially her mother, the Queen Mother, as she was known. Gibbside, haunted by the ghost of Mary Eleanor Bowes, who is often seen in the orangery there. Now, why? Well, she was incredibly talented at keeping, creating, and looking after exotic plants. She was one of the best in Britain at doing this. And her orangery was filled with all of these exotic plants of all kinds, plants from all over the world. It was her thing. And as she loved to tend the plants, it's no surprise that her ghost is still to this day regularly seen in the orangery. And weirdly, they once placed like a planter, a big wooden planter in the orangery, and it just had soil in it. 2 months after they left it there, they were planning to do something with it. They just never got round to it. When they came back, stuff started sprouting in the planter. Now, nobody put any seeds in there. And all of these exotic plants, and lilies and lilacs and stuff started growing from the planter. And they all said at the time, that is Lady Mary Eleanor Bowes doing her thing, because that's what she did. She grew exotics. Now, something else that you may not know, Mary Eleanor Bowes, the ghost, is the great-great-great-grandmother of the Queen Mother. So therefore is the great-great-great-great-grandmother of Queen Elizabeth II. And Gibbside was her home. Also, around the Gibbside area, people say that they have seen figures of monks walking around. And I suppose it was where monks were housed back in the day. So I have a problem with people who see ghosts, not because they see ghosts. I always say discount 95%, as you heard Paul mention earlier. And that's fine, discount the 95%. I don't know whether our minds, when we go to buildings like that, we go there often, I hope I see a ghost. So does your head then create a ghost image for you to see? Because our minds are incredibly clever and sophisticated, and they are capable of doing something like that. I don't know whether it's true, but I could see it. I could see it happening. So that is kind of a problem, an issue that we all should think about, which is why I say discount to 95%. When you get other people, like Paul's story where someone else said, oh, on that round there, there's a grave where I saw a man with no head. And 30 years earlier, as a child, he saw exactly the same thing. That's cool when that kind of thing happens. Now, there's also poltergeist activity around Gibbside. Strange noises and screams and yells and terror heard just coming from the greenery, not even coming from Gibbside itself, just coming from the land. Nobody has fully explained any of that before. But they also have a man with a badly deformed face. It said, on the estate, there's a ghost with a grotesque, scarred face. Now, he's thought to be the plate layer who worked on the trains there, because there was trains running back and forth from the various early door factories and lead works and iron works and such. And this plate layer found himself being hit by a train that literally took his face off. So this grotesque, battered, bloodied face, and a lot of people have seen that in and around the area that we filmed there in Roland's Gill and around Gibbside itself. So there are our tales for the day. And as opposed to us giving you a repeat of an older one, we thought we would share a few tales. And I love the fact that we could do the Blaydon races because nobody's ever done it justice before. People only give you cursory little bits instead of boom, there it all is for you. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope that you are now well and truly educated. A few ghost stories thrown in for good measure about the place, because if you look outside the window right now, it's still bright light out there, which is why we thought, well, why don't we just go around and do some stuff in the light, and then we can put it out while Tony's away, and to give me a chance to get away, because I will not literally be back probably till the weekend. So I need that time to record a few shows overseas for Robson's World. So we are heading out. Thank you very much for being with us as ever. We hope we've done you proud. We certainly have tried to make that happen. And that's pretty much it. Now we will be back on the Blah, normal time next week, Tuesday night, round about 7:30 to talk about stuff. And I'll give you some more clues as to where we will be going next week. We're hoping it's our inside do that we are kind of working on at present. And if not, I've got a couple of places that we really must get to and redo some of them. But I've got about half a dozen brand new ones as well that we really need to get out and about to do. So looking forward to some proper hunting over the next few. But that's it from us here on The Ghost Historian. Thanks again for being with us. And until we are back together again, from me, Alan Robson, thank you so much again for your love and your support. Really appreciate it. Keep an eye on Robson's World, always new stuff coming all the time on there. And until we are together again, from me, Alan Robson, and Tony, wherever he is, who helped put all of this together. Good night. God bless you. And I wish you well. Till next time, I'll see you down the road. Thanks again for being with us. We're done. Night, night. Have a good night, everybody. Enjoy. Bye-bye.